I am J Maya, and this is my very first non-musical YouTube video on my channel. If you're new to my page, first of all, welcome. I'm very happy to have you here. I'm an artist and I love to write about things that I love, which include literature and mythology and stories and everything in between. If you follow me on Instagram and or TikTok, you will know that I am obsessed with books. Honestly, if you listen to my music, you'll also probably know that. Probably the most common non-musical request that I get is to talk about some of my favorite books. So that is what I am filming today. I keep a lot of books in my apartment. This is really just a fraction of them all. But I will also say this was the first year that I ever started using Kindle on my phone and laptop, and it has been a game changer. I was very much one of those kids growing up who would walk into Barnes & Noble when they first started introducing, no, books fell. They started introducing Kindle for the first time and look at the Kindle stand in front of the store and get really upset. I just grew up loving, you know, the feeling of holding a book so much. But it is so convenient to have all these books readily accessible in one place. Super nice to just know that I don't have to constantly bring a backpack full of all my favorite books and kind of like break my back that way. So I won't have physical copies for all of the books that I'm talking about today. So without further ado, let's jump into the first part of this video, which is going to be me talking about some of my favorite books that I read in 2021. Okay. If you have ever heard me talk about books, you will inevitably have heard me mention the name Max Barry. Max Barry has definitively been my favorite author for, I would say, the last 3 or 4 years, from the moment that I was recommended Lexicon, which was a very popular book of his, at an airport bookstore. I literally have gone back to that bookstore and found the person who recommended this book to me and told them that they changed my life. This year, I was so fortunate to read 2 new books by Max Barry. I know, it's wild. In addition to obviously rereading Lexicon, which I do pretty much every year. Max Barry is known for creating these really realistic sci-fi premises and then using those as the backdrop of action thrillers. And he has really been feeding us the last 2 years. He released one book last year called Providence, and he released another one this year called The 22 Murders of Madison May. I try my best to take you through the premises of these 3 books very quickly. Lexicon is about a secret society of people called poets, who are actually people who have mastered the art of persuasion so much that they can convince anyone to do anything. There's this elite academy that people are recruited into where they can learn these skills of persuasion, and the story follows one young woman who gets an instrument of astronomical power that causes a part of the world to just completely combust. I'm someone who's always been extraordinarily fascinated by language. Perhaps you have glimpsed my Instagram bio, which is former world pun champ. I actually used to compete in the world pun circuit. This book took my like pre-existing love of language and then magnified it by thousands. I think the best part about anything that Max Barry writes, and forgive me, I will go on a tangent about this, I just think he's like a master of pacing. So for me, what makes a book really good is the pacing. What happens when there's not actively something going on in the plot, when the characters have downtime. I genuinely believe this is the most important part of books, and this is where the author's writing really shines through. In my opinion, this is where most of the character development happens, which is absolutely crucial to the structure of a good book. Max Barry is a genius at having these moments of really high tension and action, and then having this come down where you're starting to understand how these moments actually change the characters in real time. It never gives too much information about a character. I think so many books try to include a lot of exposition or info dump, and he only ever gives enough information about a character that lets you understand why the character is making the decisions that they're making. The 2 new books that I read of his this year were phenomenal. They were very much high on my list of my favorite books that I read this year. Providence is about a dystopian future where there is literally a war between humans and aliens. I know. He makes it sound so real and so cool. The book basically follows these 4 people who have been recruited to be part of a years-long expedition into space to fight the alien race. They are recruited for each of their respective skills. Number 1, you know, captaining the ship. Number 2, IT tech. Number 3, weapons. And number 4, human intelligence. But the catch is that the ship can do everything itself. So it's actually a commentary on the future of artificial intelligence in our society. I don't want to spoil the book, but I will say the book completely ramps up toward the end, which is is a bit rare for an action or thriller novel, and becomes literally this story about humans versus aliens in a way that you're really not expecting. The best part of this book for me was the character development. I think this is probably the strongest character development I've seen in a Max Barry novel. You really get to know these 4 characters inside and out over the years that they spend on this isolated spaceship. Speaking of character development, the 22 Murders of Madison May was a complete favorite of mine this year as well. The book is about the butterfly effect, so it incorporates this concept of parallel universes to talk about what would happen if small things in our life were done differently. And it follows somebody who's a serial killer and is obsessed with this one woman named Madison May, and journeys through these parallel universes to find her and convince her to fall in love with him, and then obviously the people who are trying to stop him from doing that. Like any Max Barry book, you start the book thinking, okay, this is a bit out there, and by the end you're very convinced that this could actually be a thing that happens in somebody's life somewhere. Something really cool about this book is that it's split really into 2 parts. The first part follows the organization that is trying to stop the serial killer and somebody who unwittingly gets involved in this scheme. And the second part follows all the different iterations of Madison May in the different worlds where slightly different things caused her life to be massively different. And it kind of makes you stop and think about your own life and all of the small decisions that have led you to be where you are. Okay, I need to stop talking about Max Barry because that's just gonna be this whole video. I also love mystery thrillers. This year has been an amazing year for mystery thrillers. 3 books that I read this year that were all really popular on like Book Talk, Bookstagram, that I was a little bit skeptical about before reading, that completely blew my expectations out of the water were The Couple Next Door, The Woman in the Window, and The Last House on Needless Street. The Couple Next Door and The Woman in the Window are very Gone Girl-esque. The pacing is very similar to that style of writing where you have an unreliable narrator and you don't know who to trust as the reader. The Last House on Needless Street, oh man, this is probably one of my favorites of the year. I really liked what the author has said about the book, which is that it's technically genre-wise horror, but it really is a story about survival. It is one of those books that messes with the reader's perception of the characters, like you don't know which of the characters is culpable or guilty, but at the same time, you immediately feel this immense sympathy for pretty much all of the characters involved. I guarantee you, no matter what you think happens in this book, you are wrong. Like, I was completely off. Something I read a lot this year, which probably won't come as a huge surprise if you listen to my music at all, is modern retellings of Greek mythology. For people who might not know, the first 2 songs I released this year are inspired by Greek mythology and use a lot of Greek mythology references in the lyrics. I love retellings of mythology and just honestly any kind of ancient or old story. I'm just a sucker for any time that an author is trying to reimagine it in either modern society or place it in a different setting. Or in the case of authors like Madeline Miller, tell it in the original setting but just with a slightly different twist. Some of those books include The Song of Achilles, rant incoming, The Women of Troy, Daughters of Sparta, Ariadne, Circe, also by Madeline Miller. Without a doubt, the best book in this category that I read this year should not come as a surprise to many of you. The Song of Achilles. I started this book at the end of last year and finished it at the beginning of this year, and it changed my life. I'm very much not exaggerating. It changed my life. Madeline Miller's prose, can we just stop for a second and talk about it? The fact that there are so many quotes that have come from this book that have like really just permeated our collective consciousness speaks to how beautiful the prose of this novel is. I am made of memories. Name one hero who was happy. What I loved about this book is that you never lose sight of the love between the 2 main characters. I'm usually one of those people, I get really sad when books span a long period of time. I'm a sucker for books that have condensed storylines. Even though this book encapsulates so many events, you never lose sight of the relationship at the center of the book, no matter what is happening. And the ending is probably, I can't even think about it without bursting into tears. It's probably one of the most beautiful endings to a book I've ever seen. I love endings that are bittersweet, and this book has probably the most bittersweet ending you could think of. Also, Madeline Miller announced that she's doing a Persephone novel. Can't imagine what a Persephone novel is going to be like. Another mythology retelling I absolutely loved this year was called Blue-Skinned Gods. It's inspired by Indian and specifically Hindu mythology, and as an Indian American, it always makes me so happy when books like this are written. Something I try to do every year is find some new pieces of classic literature that I haven't read yet and really dive into them. You've probably heard me talk about my love, for example, of the Odyssey and the Iliad. I just love epic poetry, but I also love quote unquote more modern classic literature like Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, Little Women, fairy tales, and fables. This year, I challenged myself to read the original Brothers Grimm fairy tales, and it was so gratifying to actually read the text. I've always known that the original fairy tales strongly differ from like the Disney-fied fairy tales that we're familiar with, but I really love the storytelling and honestly the prose and the dialogue in this version as well. I also love reading classical philosophy, and some texts that I've really gotten into this year are texts by Philo. Came across it when I went to go visit Harvard this year. For people who might not know, I graduated from Harvard last year in 2020, so I went back for a visit, went to Commonwealth Books, which is this amazing bookstore tucked in downtown Boston, and got some Philo texts. Speaking of classical literature, a middle grade book I picked up this year that I loved, because I still love middle grade and young adult fiction, we don't talk about it, is Rick Riordan's Daughter of the Deep. This should probably not come as too much of a surprise if you've listened to any of my music, but I was a huge Percy Jackson kid when I was growing up. You know what? I am still one. I reread them every year without fail, and pretty much everything Rick Riordan has ever written. So I very much stay up to date on what he's writing. And when I heard that Daughter of the Deep features an Indian American protagonist, I flipped out a little. Daughter of the Deep is based off of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which has always been a favorite of mine, and a lot of people don't know this about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Captain Nemo is Indian. He has this wild origin story about why he's so anti-British imperialism and colonialism, and I just think it is so amazing that there was a character who stood for things like that at that time. And I will say that Rick Riordan definitely did that story justice and then some. I really enjoyed reading that book. Now, if you know anything about me, you know that I love fiction. It's my favorite genre. That being said, every year I challenge myself to read some nonfiction books to expand my horizons. The first is Sara Bareilles' Autobiography, Sounds Like Me. It basically, is a very honest recap of Sara Bareilles' career and life. It was so refreshing to hear her talk about things like writer's block and things that, we as songwriters experience all the time and we don't ever really hear people at a certain level talk about. She's always been one of my favorite songwriters, and it was so amazing to read that book and just see how much passion goes into every single word that she writes and how every single song has a very personal story to her. Another book I really enjoyed was The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. The coolest thing about this book is that it draws these amazing connections and lines between different civilizations that were developing separately, but weirdly had things that linked them. I also love reading short stories, and my favorite collection of short stories that I read this year by far was I Hold a Wolf by the Ears by Laura Vandenberg. Fun fact, I actually am a former student of Laura Vandenberg. I took a class on fiction writing when I was an undergrad from her, and she's just as amazing of a professor as she is a writer. I also love romance books. A little too much for my own good, one might argue. And two books I was absolutely obsessed with this year were Normal People and The Hating Game. I watched Normal People before I read it, and when I say that this TV show changed me, I don't think I've wept harder at a piece of media. Obviously, after I finished the show, I was like, what now? So I immediately ordered the book version of it. Her writing, her prose, you feel like you're there in the room. I always think it's funny when people knock romance novels because nothing happens, but then you're like, no, there is so much happening. It's just called relationship development. The Hating Game was so good. It was hyped really highly on Book Talk, and I was a bit skeptical when I got my first copy of it, but oh my gosh, it filled every expectation that I had for it. There's nothing I love more in a good romance book than banter, and I genuinely don't think I read better banter in a romance novel. That sadly brings me to the end of my favorite books of 2021. All of these books were completely mind-blowingly incredible in such distinct ways. It was another really successful year of reading. There's nothing I love more than getting recommendations from you guys. So if you read something that you absolutely loved this year and want to drop a little comment about why you loved it so much, that would make my year. Please let me know if you want more videos like this from me. I love talking to you guys about things, and a lot of you may have actually never heard my voice, so let me know if you enjoyed this kind of content. If you want to see more non-musical videos, feel free to comment or DM me what you're interested in seeing. My books and I say thank you. I will see you so soon. I love you all so much, and I'll see you in 2022. Mwah. Bye guys.